First of all, I'd like to welcome all the folks here, distinguished visitors, fellow soldiers and airmen, as well as families and friends that made it as well today. And I'd also like to personally thank Max Haston, Roy Robinson, Don Dunbar, the entire NGAUS team, as well as Mike Lowe and the Colorado National Guard for putting on such an incredible conference. So if we could give them a quick round of applause. Okay. Also, looking across this room, I'd like to just personally thank those I've had the opportunity and honor to work with or work alongside over the past 30 years. Without your support and all the great work that you did, I wouldn't have this opportunity to be in front of you here today as your 21st Director of the Army Guard. So on a personal note, thank you for all those opportunities to learn from you along the way. So there's a lot of things, as you all know, facing the Army National Guard right now. And in the time we have, I really kind of wanted to narrow it down to just 4 areas I'd like to talk to you about this morning. And then also I want to just hear your questions at the end. And then there's just one little note I'd like to share with you at the end here. So if I could get to my first slide, please. Okay, some of you may recognize this photo. This is the 1st Battalion of the 110th Infantry Regiment, Pennsylvania National Guard, 28th Division. That photo was taken 75 years ago this week. And obviously you can recognize the Arc de Triomphe. They're the 1st Division Eisenhower selected to march in to Paris after the liberation of Paris, shortly behind the 2nd Armored Division of the French Army under General Leclerc. I had the opportunity to be there last week for this event, and the cool thing about wearing this uniform is to see those World War II veterans from France, how excited they were to realize I wasn't a reenactor, first of all. But then to realize I was actually from the American Army, in this case, the Army National Guard. And although I didn't speak French and they didn't speak English, if you could have seen the excitement in their eyes to see someone or a uniform representing the folks they fought alongside, it was truly incredible. And for those that don't know, of the 18 National Guard divisions that fought in World War II, 7 of those divisions fought in France, from Normandy all the way through into Germany. So the National Guard presence there was really, really fantastic during that time and very well recognized, not only by the French people, but probably most importantly by the veterans that served alongside our folks. So there's another reason why I wanted to put this picture up, and that's because we're looking at our divisions. For those familiar with the new National Defense Strategy, and all of us should by now, we're looking more at a near-peer competitor fight. So for the past 18 years, our unit of action has primarily been the brigade, but under large-scale combat ground operations, it's now the division. And why this is important is currently in the National Guard, we have 8 divisions, but they're division headquarters. But if you look across our formations, we have literally all the down trace units, with the exception of civil affairs and psychological operations, to fill out 8 complete divisions. And so, if you're not familiar with this, there's a gentleman by the name of Mike Lundy, 3-star, and Eric and Wesley. They looked over hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, after-action reports from our combat training centers, deployments, and also some historical facts. And they developed 17 capability gaps that currently exist in our Army. And the number 6 one in there is that echelon above brigade headquarters are not optimized for large-scale ground combat operations. And so when I look across our formations, the thing I would propose to you is establishing, or really reestablishing, divisional alignment or divisional associations. Now, what I don't want to do is tell the adjutants, generals, or division commanders how to do this. But what I want to do is start the conversation about aligning our BCTs, our maneuver enhanced brigades, our combat aviation brigades, and all the down trace units with those divisions. What this does for us is when you look at the current National Defense Strategy, the Army has really 10 full divisions. This would allow us to provide the Army 18 full divisions that look exactly the same. I mean, there's a few minor variations between the airborne, the 82nd, and also the heavy, but generally we could meet the same formation. Now, what this also does is creates the opportunity for the Army to establish 2 or potentially 3 additional corps headquarters. Now, it does a lot of things for the Guard by doing this, but it also creates the opportunity at some point in the future to potentially establish a Guard Corps commander or a Guard Corps. Now, that's way down the road, but it's just one of those things that we look at the potential possibilities here. But perhaps one of the best things for our organization, by doing this, it provides training and professional development opportunities across the 54 from company grade all the way up to division commander. Because, and let me just take it for an example, I was a commander of the 41st IBCT out of Oregon. We didn't work for any division. Now the 40th in California was just south of us. And so what we're looking at is if you've got an extremely capable battalion commander in the 41st, say, after battalion command, there's no reason we couldn't try and get the resources for that battalion commander to go down and be the G3 for the 40th Division. And after the G3, potentially back to be the 41st BCT commander, and after that can be to be an assistant division commander or potentially even the division commander. And so what it does, it allows those states surrounding them or the states with brigade combat teams or maybe even not a brigade combat team, but a down trace unit for that division to provide them the opportunity to train or get division level experience. And so now, 4 or 5 years from now, we've got a pool of highly qualified candidates, maybe 5 or 6, that could compete to be assistant division commanders or division commanders. So this is just one of the proposals I'm working right now, and I just want to share that with you. Okay, second slide. Okay, what I want to talk about here is readiness and lethality. How many folks have been in one of the CTC rotations in the last 4 years? Show of hands real quick. Okay. All right, so we're up to 4 a year now. 2 at NTC, 2 at JRTC. I went through NTC as a company commander back in the 90s, after the Cold War, but not too far after. But one of the great things there, I still remember today some of the things that I learned at the National Training Center, and I had never learned them anywhere else. And I was actually company commander at Fort Bragg, and we thought we trained very well, but I realized how much I didn't know when I got there. And what we're starting to see now in some cases is units like the 116th going to their second rotation within the last 7 years. And so you now have a cadre of soldiers that have been there before, and they're doing much better the second time around. The reason why CTC rotations are so important is it's really perhaps one of the most dynamic and realistic combat training that you'll ever get. In fact, some folks have argued it's even better than some of the combat rotations that they've seen over the last 18 years. But the importance here is that we get our folks that experience so that it grows and is resident within our organizations. Now, the other thing we have to look at, particularly when we look at our armor and our striker brigade combat teams, however, is their op tempo. I've met with the units, I've talked to some of the adjutants general, and I will tell you, it is a significant demand to go to an XCTC, an NTC, and then hopefully a deployment after that. And so I've been working with the Army, and because some of our units have been on a 1-to-4 sustainment readiness model, we're trying to get as close as we can. The goal is to get to a 1-to-5, because it's those company commanders and company level NCOs that there's a huge demand on their time. And it's not just their family, their employer, but when you're doing 68 to 100 days at an XCTC year, and then also at an NTC year, that puts a significant amount of stress on your life. And we have to do whatever we can to reduce that stress level and the level of impact so that they could still go there and learn all the lessons at NTC, but not at a cost to their family or their employer. So we're working very closely with the TAGs and the BCT commanders to find out what that is so we can find that point where our soldiers don't have to make a decision between one of those three. Now, the other thing along these lines, when we look at this increased op tempo and the CTC rotations, is we have to make sure, and we're working very closely with the Army, to make sure that we are resourced to the level of our readiness requirements. And this covers many facets, but most particularly it's our full-time support. And that's one thing you'll see from General Engel and from myself. That is still one of our highest priorities, to gain full-time support. Unfortunately, we're going to have to look at different techniques because it hasn't really gained us much over the past few years. But it's not just AGRs and armories. One of the other things we really have to focus on are maintainers, not only for our ground combat vehicles, but also for our aircraft. Because as you increase the op tempo, you can't do the same amount of work with the same amount of people when you use the vehicles much more often. Not only that, some of our stuff is still legacy equipment that requires a lot more maintenance. And so the Army has recognized the importance of maintainers, so we're also looking at that area as well. Ultimately, however, when we look at this, our readiness and lethality, and look as a future as the Army modernizes, we have to make sure we keep three things. We have to make sure that our equipment and our people are deployable, they're sustainable, meaning the parts are still available, and also they have to be interoperable. So whatever equipment the Army goes to, we have to be able to talk, we have to be able to communicate, and we need to be able to work together on the battlefield. Because if not, then we do no longer become a relevant force. One of the things along there as well is you look at our state partnership program and our friends and allies. We have to also make sure that we are interoperable with them because they're a great capability that really improves our combat lethality, but we have to make sure that we remain interoperable with them as well. Okay, next slide. All right, this is probably one of my favorite ones. The last two slides are actually for the best, and this is about our people. And these are folks from the 116th out of Virginia National Guard doing their XCTC recently. So one of the things I would tell you here is these young men and women are remarkable people. And they give up a lot, and they volunteer to serve their country and their state. And we as leaders at every single level have to do everything we can so that the time that they give up away from their employers and their families, they get to do what they signed up to do as much as possible. Now, Secretary Esper, before he became Secretary of Defense, had a program where he tried to ask folks, hey, what can I eliminate? What can I reduce? Things that are distracting from your ability to train and increase your readiness levels. And he came out with a list of items, which I did when I became the director. I emailed out to all the adjutants general. But to me, I don't know that that was enough. And so I would ask you, leaders, particularly at the lowest level, company commanders, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, first sergeants, to take a look across your training schedules. And if there are things that are inhibiting you or preventing you from getting down to the training and getting your soldiers the training that they signed up to do, help me help you identify those things so that we can drive that decision authority down to the lowest level. Because it's those company commanders that spend time with their soldiers every single drill weekend, and first sergeants, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, they can get a read on the impact. And we're trying to work with our adjutants general to give the lowest level the ability to adjust the rheostat on your training and the amount of training days so that you can meet your readiness requirements, not at the expense of breaking the force, however. Okay. And this goes to like a data set I had recently seen. They talked about soldiers that got out of the Army National Guard, and a lot of them just said, hey, I was done, I wanted to move on for my family or my career. But after they left, they filled out a survey when they weren't in front of their leadership. And 40% of them said they left because of their leaders. They didn't want to stay in the organization. And so that really falls on all of us, that we really have to do everything we can as a leader, but then also for your peers and subordinates to make sure that they're doing everything they can to create an environment where our soldiers want to stay. Also, when I was a TAG of Oregon, a follow-on point, we hired one of our first sergeants to call all the soldiers that left the organization. And it was surprising how many soldiers left the organization because nobody asked them to stay. They hit the end of their enlistment, they just got out. And they just said, hey, nobody asked me to stick around. Another common theme was they said, look, I joined the infantry, but I wanted to be a truck driver, or I wanted to be a cavalry scout, or I want to be an aircraft mechanic. And the unit didn't do enough legwork on their behalf to keep that soldier in the formation and let him do something else. So I'd ask you to do that as best you can. Listen to your soldiers and do everything we can, particularly those that we want to retain in the formation. There's things that we can do to the betterment of them and also meet what they're trying to do and keep them in the formation. Okay. Another concern about this is when you look across the formation, and this is active guard and reserve, I believe the statistic is as high as 40% don't even complete their first term of enlistment. And so part of this is us working with them, also making sure we work on their resiliency and keep these folks in the formation to at least get them to finish their first term, because if we can do that, that is a huge impact on our organization. If you were here the other day, General McConville talked about 120,000 people every year come into the U.S. Army, and that's all three components. If you look at our share of that, that's close to 50,000 people every single year come into this organization. And if we can reduce the outflow and get folks to stay for their term, that is going to have a huge impact on our organization. And when you look beyond that, if they decide to get out, that's a personal choice, and we definitely want to support that as much as we can. Of course, we want to make it available and do everything we can to retain those soldiers. But if our soldiers leave on a good note, they become our best recruiters and best retention tool that we'll ever have. Because if they have a good positive experience, they're going to be the ones that influence others to join the organization or to stay in the organization. And in some cases, I've seen folks that have gotten out and then missed it and then actually come back to be part of the organization because of the way we treated them throughout the time they were there, but especially when they leave. And this is kind of a personal thing for me. Anytime you have a soldier that leaves your formation, make it a big deal, not just for them, but for their family. It really concerned me when a soldier that was his last drill and they left, everybody said goodbye. If we don't fail to recognize them, particularly in front of their families, then we do ourselves a huge disservice. Because it's the family that over the last 3, 4, 5, or 6 years of their service that gave up all those weekends, those birthdays, those soccer games, those football games, all those things. They want to know that their soldiers, their father, brother, mother, or sister, or husband, that the time they gave up was valued. And when they see that, then they realize, okay, they did that. They gave up a lot, but look what they did for our organization. Look how much they miss them. So please do not miss that opportunity to recognize our folks on the way out the door, because sometimes that's the incentive that their family says, hey, you really seem to like that. Why don't you think about going back? Or when they go on, their friends and relatives see that and they know that level of experience, and then they're some of our best recruiters that we'll ever have. One of the other things I like about this picture is General McConville talks about the importance of squad leaders and team leaders. And I think we all know that already. These are the folks the closest to our individual soldiers out there. They're the ones that spend time with them. They're the ones that hopefully know if they've got issues going on in their life or if there's things that they're struggling with. We have a lot of resources out there, and it's our frontline leaders. It's that interaction with those soldiers that's going to help us get them through any issues that they're facing, hopefully. Now, we're a little bit different because sometimes we only see our soldiers on a drill weekend during AT, or for most of us, multiple drill weekends. But we have to encourage our soldiers to have that communication with them so that these young soldiers that join the organization feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves, because that's why they came in. But the other thing is it gives them an opportunity to get an understanding on how these soldiers are doing, and if they're not doing well, if they're having trouble with their employer, if they're having issues at home. And that's where we look at our first line leaders to take the initiative to do what they can to make it better. Meaning if you've got a soldier that's really struggling at work, getting behind, maybe you work a split train option for them so that they can get caught up. Or they've got a major family event, birth of a child, wedding anniversary, or birthday or something like that that's really important to them, is to work with them to give them the time to do that when there's a conflict. Because by us reaching out to them, showing we value them as an individual and what's going on in their life, they realize how important the organization is and how important they are to us. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, this is a fantastic picture, by the way, from the Nebraska Guard. That expression really says it all, probably more than anything I can say. You probably all heard the expression that we recruit soldiers, but we retain families. And I would tell you, everyone in that picture makes that soldier service worthwhile. Now, we all love to do what we do, at least I do. I hope you do as well. But it's our families that are absolutely critical to that, because they support each and every one of us. And for many of you, you have children that are either in the military or thinking about it, and you want to help set up an environment for them that really takes care of them. So the thing that we have to do in everything that we do, and I try and do this at the directorate, is think about those three things: their military career, their civilian career, and their family. And we have to help our soldiers find that balance so they don't have to choose between those three. Because when they do, oftentimes it's the military. And for many folks, that's the right decision. And so we have to do everything we can across the board. Now, part of this is to relay to the families the importance, number one, of their service member's service, but also to make sure that they're aware of the benefits that come along with that service. I know there's a lot of states that run great programs that if somebody's getting near an ATS, they bring in the family and they talk to them about all the benefits of staying in the Guard. And a common response is the family's like, really? We could do that? How come we haven't taken advantage of this? Now that's on us for not relaying it to them as soldiers. And actually, when I was a TAG of Oregon, my wife at a spouse function, actually this lady said, you know, gosh, my husband wants to stay in the Guard, but we can't afford it. And Kelly goes, well, what do you mean? Well, gosh, he gives up that whole weekend and he doesn't get paid for it. And unfortunately, my wife kind of said, well, hold on a second, they get paid for this. So there's a few folks out there that might still do that, but I do not advise that. But anyway, there's a lot of benefits there. TRICARE is one of the biggest ones. When you look at what some of our soldiers pay for their civilian employer provided medical care, TRICARE is a great value. Now, TRICARE does have issues like every medical plan does as well, and depending on where you are in the country, there are things that may be of concern to you. So please help us identify those so we can address those at our level and hopefully make a difference so that the soldiers can take advantage of that and see value in that as well. Now, not only do we have to inform our folks about the benefits that they're entitled to, particularly the families, but we also have to make sure that we do everything we can that comes through. One of the biggest concerns I have right now is 180-day orders so our folks get on TRICARE prior to deployment. And you know, there's a million excuses out there, but on Friday I had our staff working overtime to get this done because we had an issue with the 30th and a couple of other states were having trouble getting their TRICARE. So the issue is, please help us identify those units, and we track this at the directorate every single day, those folks that are coming up on the 180 days out, because what we want to do is stabilize that for the families and reduce the stress that it may cause to them, but also give them that opportunity to get enrolled and so that there's no decrease or change in their medical care while our soldiers are training, deploying, and then redeploying. Okay. Along those lines as well with ESGR, when we talk about our employers, there's a lot of great programs that we could do to inform the employers, but ultimately, I would ask you, because I had to do this when I was deployed as a brigade commander, to remind our soldiers when they're deployed to stay in communication with their employers. Every formation I went to in Iraq, I'd ask them, when's the last time you talked to your employer? And I would encourage them to at least, email once a week, once a month, just so they knew and there was no surprises. Because you look at that when you come back from a deployment, or if you've been gone for like 4 or 5 weeks on a training event, if you haven't communicated with your employer, you're kind of stressed. Gosh, I haven't talked to him in a couple months and I'm supposed to show up at work on Monday. And so please encourage our soldiers to do that, because then they can also help us early identify if there's an issue that we need to address with the employer before they get back. Because we want to, as much as possible, make that a seamless transition to deployment. Everybody knows where they're going, what they're going to generally be doing, and about when they're going to come back. And then we want to prep them so when they're coming back, the employer and the family knows, hey, they're going to be back at this time, and this is the day they're going to probably either show up at home or be back at work. So we can reduce the stress on our soldiers and make it more seamless when they serve their country like that. The other thing across the board, I can't say enough about recruiting and retention, and families are a big part of that, as I mentioned earlier. So please work with them, because they are the ones that the families are talking to other families, and when they see those benefits, it's one more way we can recruit and retain our soldiers. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to hit, those 4 events. I do have a little note at the end I'd like to share, but there are many things that we're addressing in the Army Yard right now. But I want to talk about divisions, because I think that's a great opportunity for us. Readiness and lethality, that's going to continue through on, especially as we look at the Army in 2028 and what it potentially will look like. We want to make sure our formations are there and ready when our country needs them. Our soldiers, the basic building block of our entire organization. We have to take care of them, train them, so that we can build those squads, which make platoons, which make companies, which make battalions, which make brigades, and eventually make divisions, which are then potentially part of a corps. But this last slide makes all of that possible, these families. And so please do everything you can to work with them to make their life important and then realize the value, how we look at them. I'll share with you a quick story. When I was a captain, I was at a function for our battalion, and I worked for the battalion S3, and we had this young soldier who had brought his wife and his young son to the function, and the soldier brought up his wife and wanted to introduce his wife and his son to the captain. And he said, "Hey, sir, this is my wife and son." And the captain, I don't think he meant this in the way it came across, but I was just a few feet away watching this, and he said, "Hey, yeah, your dad works for me. He does this, and I like having him work for me." And in a split second, I saw the expression on the wife change. And I don't think, as I said, he meant it, but she just kind of said hi and then just kind of walked away. And when I looked at that opportunity, I never forgot that, because the soldier, the captain at the time, what I think he would have done, what I recommended, is just say, "Hey, look, I work with your husband. He is an awesome soldier, and this organization could not do what it does without all of his sacrifice and all the time he puts in. And we are so thankful that you split your time with him so that he can be part of our formation." And the other thing is, when you look at kids, I always try and kneel down and get eye to eye with the kids. Because to the spouse and the son or the parent or the brother or sister, their soldier to them is the supreme allied commander. They are their hero. They're the best thing in their life. And they want to know all that time they give up is valued. And when you sit down and you look at those kids in the eye and you just say, "Hey, thanks for letting your dad do this. He is awesome," or "She is awesome." And they give all this time, and we know you don't see them on weekends. But what they do for our country and for our state, responding to disasters or deploying, is something that makes our country great. That short 15 seconds, folks will never forget. That happened to me and my son one time walking down the street when I just came back from Iraq. I had just left the armory. I picked him up, and we stopped by the store to get some stuff on the way home, and I was still in uniform. And this gentleman, first time ever, walked up to me and said, "Hey, sir, thank you for your service." And my son was next to me holding my hand. He was probably 7 at the time. And I'll never forget, he looked at that guy and he just squeezed my hand really hard. And we walked away. He goes, "Dad, I thought people didn't realize that you were gone, and now I realize they do." So, sorry, that's kind of something that reminds me, but please remember that. Okay. All right, let me wrap it up on that, Max, and take a couple of questions while we have a few times.
Absolutely. Okay. We can bring the lights up just a little bit. And if you want to, got a question, come down to the microphones, and we'll take about, we got about 15 minutes.
Okay.
For questions.
All right, sounds good.
Target's up.
Okay.
Sir, I want to mention, take this opportunity here. I know what you do is tough every day, but I know you got 2 people sitting down here on the front row that we need to recognize too, that make sure staff complete. Sergeant Major, Chief, would y'all please stand up?
Yep.
There's no commander out there that can do their job without that, sir. I know.
Absolutely. Chief Domeyer and Command Sergeant Major Sampa, they're awesome teammates. And if you haven't got a chance to meet them, please meet them while you're here, or stop by the Readiness Center anytime and please say hi to us.
Okay, sir, okay. To the right over here.
All right.
Good morning, sir. Greg Parker from the great state of Louisiana.
Greg, good to see you again.
You too, sir. Sir, General Murray talked about the changing in formations as we move forward in the future force. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the role of the Army Reserve should be and has become over the last few years in creeping into the National Guard's combat mission.
So when you go back to the offsite of 1993, there was a clear differentiation, as I read the notes, that the senior leaders of the Army wanted to make sure that there was not a competition among the reserve components. And from my understanding is they wanted the Army National Guard to be focused on combat formations and the reserve on combat support and combat service support. Although we do have some combat support, actually a lot of combat support and combat service support in the National Guard. My concern is I would really like to make sure that we follow that because I think it's absolutely critical that we keep our combat formations in the Army National Guard and that we don't compete with the Army Reserve on really our manpower and the folks that are either leaving active duty or coming into the service. I think that's a great capability that we're bringing with the National Guard. And if you go back to what many would contribute to the Abrams Doctrine, that when our nation mobilizes, and we mobilize our National Guard because we're in 2,800 communities across the country, the National Guard mobilizes the fabric of America. So Greg, I appreciate that comment, and I will do everything I can to make sure that we continue to follow that, because I think that's a critically way forward for us. So thank you. Cool.
Sir, Captain Dent, Maryland. As the former ESO for the state and now current company commander for recruiting and retention, GEMS has taken on a huge role with retention of our soldiers. We are promising them bonuses, and we are now not able to pay them. And the word is getting out, I signed up for $20,000 and I have yet to be paid. So that discourages other individuals to be, encouraged to join. So what is NGB and or the Army Guard doing to rectify this huge GEMS issue that is now 6 to 8 months behind in payments?
Okay. So thank you for that question. This is something that I literally track every single day. And not to get into too much detail, but the program that was supposed to do this failed. And their servers went down and there was no backup and we had to go manually. Now the company is in the process. I think 2 weeks ago was the first dry test to make sure they could get everything back online. And then what happened is they were going to bring it back online, but after consultation with the adjutants general, we realized, look, at the end of the fiscal year, we don't want to jeopardize that or delay that any longer. And so what we're doing is driving through with the manual process and then working with the states to help us identify those soldiers. Because what they found is when they rewrote the program to get it back online, what didn't work was the note to come back to say it was paid. And so now they've assured me that the majority of the soldiers are paid, but in few cases, if it gets rejected for any reason, and this could be like the wrong bank account number, the social security number doesn't match the name, there's a lot of different smaller areas. What they didn't get is an error message to say it didn't pay. And so they've had to manually go through, and when you look at the number of soldiers in the tens of thousands, how do they find that? And so I would ask anybody in the room, if you have a soldier, please get us the name. We're trying to find those, but it's, in a way, you're looking for the negative error on that. If you can tell us the name, then we can dive into it quickly and go straight to it and try and figure out what's going wrong. Now, the way ahead is that this new program is supposed to come online after the first of the fiscal year, after the 1st of October, and it's supposed to resolve all those issues that failed when the system went down. And I am just as concerned about you, because a lot of folks, they've got tuition, they've got house payments, they've got cars, all that stuff, they're reliant on that. And this is just basically taking care of soldiers. So help us. We're doing everything we can at our level to get this up and running. But if you have an individual soldier, please reach out to us so we can come from the back end, already knowing the name and the social, and we can find out where that error message was in the program and why it wasn't paid. And we actually do have folks also there at DFAS working for us, specifically guardsmen, to help address this as well.
Thank you.
So thanks for that important question.
Okay, over here.
Sir, Tim Williams from Virginia. How are you today?
Good, Tim. How's the great state of Virginia?
We're doing great, sir. Thank you so much. First and foremost, I think it's important to say thank you, sir, for the leadership and the direction that you're taking us, and for the entire team within the Army Directorate there. Sir, just would like to get your thoughts on where you see General Garrett going with Forces Command in terms of trying to be a good partner and putting some boundaries on the amount of time our soldiers are committing to the mission, and how we're going to look in the future in terms of synchronization.
Okay, a great question, Tim. And this is kind of where I go back to our first line leaders again. When we look at our business model, we're not the active duty. What I'm saying is we do a lot, we make a lot of sacrifices for our country, but the nation doesn't pay for us full time. And that's why we're such a national treasure, as you've seen throughout this conference. But what we have to do is find that balance. And I know we have readiness requirements, and that's working with General Garrett and leveraging the time we have. And this kind of goes back to my earlier comment. When our soldiers show up for a drill weekend or annual training, we need to take all those detractors away so they can focus on the readiness and lethality. And if we can do that in a shorter amount of time by reducing those external or additional requirements, or reducing them to the fact that, look, we're not here 24/7, so we don't have a 4-hour block of time, but if you can put this in 30 minutes, or if we have a soldier that's capable of getting that point across in 15 minutes and meeting the intent of it, I'm all for that. So we have to manage our time at every level, but then we also have to understand, well, we all know this, that the Army and the nation relies on us to meet certain requirements, not only here within the country, but also deployed. And so we have to do everything we can to meet those requirements, but then also find that balance. And we have to have our first line leaders tell us, hey, look, we have to slow down, or I can only do 39 days this year, or I could do 100 days this year, and all my soldiers are willing to do it. We need to balance that so that we can meet our requirements but not break the force. And once again, I know there's times when we have to pick one of the three over when we talk about our military career, our family, and our civilian career, but that shouldn't be a constant thing. We shouldn't have to make our soldiers make a permanent decision on that. So Tim, I'd ask for your help really at the tags to help us help you to find where that is. And really our first line leaders, your tag relies on you sharing that information so he can relay it to us, and we can have those conversations with General Garrett on what we can and can't do. Because we always say yes, and that's the beauty of the Guard. There's nothing we can't do. But sometimes we have to temper that. I can do this, but here's the risk associated with it, and so that our leaders can make that decision that, yeah, that risk is worth it or not worth it. Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, final question over here.
Okay.
Good morning, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Guerrero, Recruiting Commander for the Nevada National Guard.
Cool.
Nevada is currently at 104% end strength. We have the capacity to grow in Nevada. Based off of the changing demographics nationwide, has any consideration been given to realigning force structure to states that have the capacity to grow?
So great question. And 104, if you guys get to 110 by the 30th, I would really appreciate it, okay?
Sir,
No.
we have no vacant positions.
Okay, all right. Well, here's what I would say towards that. When we look at the organization, and really go back to our mentors, they really tried to make sure we had an essential 10 capability in each of our states to respond not only to that, but also to provide the capability to our nation. And what I look at right now is what the Army wants to be in the future, and they've talked about the 6 areas of growth, the 6 priorities. And what I'm trying to focus on right now is identify where that Army growth opportunity is. Because what I'd like to do, first of all, is I would rather grow our force structure than move it between states if at all possible. And I want to make sure that we do everything we can in the states that aren't at 104%, that we do everything we can to provide them the capabilities to bring those units up. And if I could just take a short point here, when we move units between states, it has an impact on the community, the organization, the ability for that unit even to be deployable. And sometimes I think the better investment is to get that unit up to speed. But then for the states that are overdriving, that have shown the capability to grow, is to look out to see what the Army of 2028 is going to look like. Is it going to be an increase in short-range air defense? Are there long-range precision fire capabilities? And I want to start advocating for that force structure to go to those states that have the capability to recruit and retain and develop the leaders for those formations. When you look at the fact that our force structure is at 335.5, I'd like our force structure to be 350 or more. But what I have to do is we have to have the soldiers in our formations and show or demonstrate the capability to fill those so that when the Army comes up with, hey, here's an organization we need to field, then we can say we can do that here in Nevada or Texas or Missouri or Oregon or California, wherever that state is that can provide that capability. And so I would rather do that if at all possible. But thanks for what you're doing, and please keep up the great work.
Thank you, sir. If you give it to us, we'll fill it.
Cool. All right. So back
Sir,
to the
thank you
Yep.
for being here today.
Yep.
Thank you for giving your time. I know you and Kelly give your heart and soul to this, and we absolutely, truly appreciate it. Let's have a round of applause for our 21st director.
Absolutely.
Sergeant at Arms, please escort